This is Lesson 2, Perform Post-Installation Configuration. In this lesson, we discuss how to configure Windows 10 following installation or upgrade. During the lesson, you'll learn how to configure sign-in options, customize the user interface, configure Microsoft Edge, configure Internet Explorer, configure mobility settings, and configure power options. The hands-on demonstrations in this lesson include configuring Windows authentication options, configuring the user interface and notifications, configuring Microsoft Edge and Internet Explorer Enterprise Mode, configuring Internet Explorer, and configuring power options, battery settings, and power plans.
Multi-factor authentication is supported by Windows 10. Multi-factor authentication requires two or more authentication methods. These are something that you are, something that you have, and something that you know. So for example, something that you know might be a username and a password. Something that you have might be a physical device. So for instance, it might be possible for you to receive a text message to confirm you are who you claim to be when you sign in on a new device. Something that you are is a biometric. Fingerprint, facial recognition, retina scan. A number of these exist. These are becoming more commonly available even in fairly entry-level devices now. Windows 10 also supports digital certificates. Think of a digital certificate as being something like a passport that proves who you are. But more than that, a passport is issued by an authority that people trust. So digital certificates are part of a public key infrastructure, or PKI, which consists of certificate authorities, which are issuing authorities. They issue and manage certificates in the same way as the Passport Office might issue and manage passports as a proof of ID. And Windows 10 also supports biometric authentication. You can enable biometrics with group policy settings. Open up the policy editor and navigate to Administrative Tools, Windows Components and Biometrics. And then as you can see on the right here, you can configure allow the use of biometrics, allow users to log on using biometrics, allow domain users to log on using biometrics, and then specify timeout for fast user switching events. Additionally, there is a facial features node for configuring those respective settings. Windows Hello enables your users to sign in using biometric authentication. Windows Hello for Business extends that to use multi-factor authentication to sign into Windows 10. Users can use a PIN, that's a personal identification number, or biometric sign-in system to sign into a Windows 10 computer. This enables users to authenticate to applications, to enterprise content, and online authentication providers such as, for example, Office 365 or Microsoft 365. Note that when Windows 10 first shipped, it included two separate authentication technologies, Microsoft Passport and Windows Hello. These two are now combined as Windows Hello to provide for multi-factor authentication. The benefits of Windows Hello: strong passwords are difficult to remember. Consequently, users will write them down or in other ways compromise them. If you allow your users to use simple passwords, then they can be relatively easily guessed. Passwords are also vulnerable to replay attacks. This means it's possible for malicious software to capture a password and then to reuse that password. Passwords are also vulnerable to phishing attacks. Typically that might be in the form of an email requesting information from a user, which may include a requirement to enter a password. To avoid these vulnerabilities, it's necessary to implement Windows Hello. This helps provide protection against credential theft. It also supports hybrid and cloud-only deployments and provides for a faster sign-in. I have a Surface Go device, and Surface Go uses facial recognition. As soon as I boot the device, which takes 8 or 9 seconds, if I'm within visual range, which is actually not that close, it recognizes me, even if I'm wearing my admittedly rimless glasses, and then immediately signs me in. It doesn't require for me to swipe up or down or enter a PIN or to remember a password and type it in. It just recognizes who I am. So let's have a look at some of the authentication options in Windows 10. To access the sign-in options, go to Settings, select the Accounts node, and then select the Sign-in Options tab. Depending on the configuration of your computer, that's the physical configuration, will determine precisely the options that you have available. You can see, for example, on my current laptop, Windows Hello Facial Recognition is not available. That's because it doesn't have an appropriate camera, and nor is Windows Hello Fingerprint. However, I can sign into Windows using a PIN. I can select that option, and then I can change my existing PIN or remove a PIN if I want to stop using PIN sign-in. I sometimes get asked, why is a PIN safer to use than a password, a complex password, or even a simple password? After all, a 4-digit number can't be that difficult to guess. Well, 4 digits gives you a fair number of combinations, in fact, so it's quite difficult to guess, and a PIN number is relatively easy for a user to remember, but quite hard for a malicious person to guess. Couple that with the fact that the PIN is only useful on this device. So if I sign in on another computer, I may have the same PIN, or I may have a different PIN, or I may not use a PIN at all. So the PIN requires not only knowledge of the PIN, but also the specific device where it was used. That helps to make it more secure. I can use a physical security key if I want to by creating that. That requires a USB memory stick, and I insert that during the sign-in process to determine or to verify who I am. Again, that's a multi-factor option because it's requiring me to have something. And then there's the traditional password as a way of signing in. And then a slightly more unusual picture password. So you can display a picture on the screen during the sign-in, and then you can use your finger on a touch screen to map a pattern that you've recorded that only you know, that will help you sign in, much like we do on mobile phones. So in the demonstration, you were able to see the various authentication options available on a Windows 10 computer. If you're new to Windows 10, there's quite a lot that's different in the user interface and the way in which it's configured compared with Windows 7. But broadly speaking, the same sort of options exist. Let's step through some of those now. Perhaps the most obvious difference is customizing Start. The Start menu behaves in a little bit of a different way under Windows 10. You can customize to show more tiles on Start, to show an app list in the Start menu. That's a list of all of the apps, alphabetically sorted. To show any recently added apps. Any apps that you add are always indicated as being new until you've run them at least once with the word new. But you can also list them at the top of the Start menu in the app list. If you use apps a lot, they can be listed at the top under Show Most Used Apps. You can also show suggestions occasionally in Start. You can run Start full screen. That's more usual when you're using a touch device. So, for example, I've got a fairly small Windows device, a Windows Go, which is, about I think it's about a 10-inch display, something like that. So relatively small, smaller than a Surface Pro, and certainly smaller than my 13-inch HP laptop. So when I run it in full screen, that's probably a more user-friendly interface for a touch-only device. And show recently opened items in jump lists. This is quite useful actually, because it means if you've got icons pinned to the taskbar, that's the bar across the bottom of the screen, if you right click something like your Word shortcut, it will show you all the documents that you've recently opened, and you can select amongst those. You can also pin some of the more frequently used applications to the list. You can also specify which folders will appear on Start, so that might be your libraries, such as pictures and videos and documents, and you can pick which of those you want to have appear. If your computer is configurable as a tablet device, and many are these days, then this option is useful, Configure Tablet Mode. I have two computers. I've got an HP laptop which has a screen that folds all the way around 360 degrees. When I flip it around, it disables the physical keyboard and reorientates the display so that it's running in tablet mode. And that happens automatically because of the options I've configured. Likewise, my Surface Go has a detachable keyboard. When I detach the keyboard, it changes into tablet mode. When I reattach it, it flicks back into or out of tablet mode. You can see the options here on the display. You can choose to, when I sign in, use tablet mode, use desktop mode, or use the appropriate mode for the hardware at that moment. You can also configure when this device is automatically switch tablet mode on or off. You can then don't ask me and don't switch, or always ask me before switching, or don't ask me and always switch. So I can choose that behavior for my HP laptop if I want to, so that as I rotate it around the axis and the keyboard goes beyond 180 degrees, what's it going to do? Is it going to ask me before switching into tablet mode, or just go ahead and do it? And that's configurable. When you're in tablet mode, you can also configure the following options. You can hide application icons on the taskbar in tablet mode so that you've got a bit more space. The thing about switching from desktop mode to tablet mode is the assumption is that you're going to start using your fingers on the screen, and fingers tend to be a little less small, a little smaller in other words, than a mouse pointer. And so touching things on the screen on the taskbar, which is easy with the mouse, is less easy with your fingertip because it's bigger. So you can hide those icons to give you a bit more working room. You can automatically hide the taskbar completely in tablet mode. I prefer not to do that, but it's configurable. You might find that you can navigate completely by swiping from the left and the right, or by tapping some devices come with a specific Windows button, and you can just press that and it will bring up the start screen for you. Once you've decided or configured tablet mode for those devices which are convertible, you can also configure tiles. I'll show you this in more detail in a demonstration in a minute, but essentially you can configure how your tiles on the right hand side look. So you can make them big, make them small, make them wider. You can enable active content on them so they animate. You can group them together and so on. So all of those behaviors are available. The Action Center is the right hand side of the display. You can see that here. It deals with notifications in the top half, and then the bottom has a number of tiles that you can use to configure, again, access to configuration options, those that you want to frequently access. And you can configure the Action Center through the Notifications and Actions tab on the System node of the Settings app. So open that Settings, go to System, and then choose Notification and Actions, and you can configure what appears here in the notification area and how notifications are handled. You can manage notifications to quite a degree of accuracy. You can even get notifications from specific applications as well. The taskbar appears at the bottom of the screen, and you can control its behavior. So automatically hide it in desktop mode, or automatically hide it in tablet mode or not. Use small taskbar buttons or not. Use peek, which means when you hover your mouse pointer over an icon, it will produce a sort of a small snapshot of what would happen were you to click that icon. So if you're running Word, then it will show you a mini version of the document that you've got open. I'll show you that in a second. Another useful feature here is when you right click Start, there are various options that appear, and you can choose to replace the command prompt with Windows PowerShell. Bear in mind that Windows PowerShell allows you to run all command prompt programs, whereas the command prompt does not allow you to run any Windows PowerShell commandlets. So it's not a bad idea probably to replace command prompt with Windows PowerShell, and a variety of other options which I'll go through in the demo. Cortana is your digital assistant, and you can enable and configure behavior for that, assuming you have speakers and a microphone, which I'd imagine is pretty much the case for every PC. Accessibility options exist to make the operating system more accessible to users, including display settings, cursor and pointer settings, the magnifier, color filters, high contrast settings for the display, and narration settings. When you install Windows 10, you're expected to choose a language and a keyboard layout, and you can also optionally choose several keyboard layouts during installation, but you can then configure additional language packs afterwards. You can open Settings, select the Time and Language option, and then click Region and Language. And then under Languages, select Add a Language, and then select the language that you want to use. I'm going to show you a short demonstration now on configuring the user interface and configuring notifications. So in no particular order, if I want to configure taskbar settings, I can right-click the taskbar and choose Taskbar Settings from the context menu, and it will take me to the appropriate location within settings. You can see that here. And then I can configure automatically hide the taskbar in desktop mode. If I select that now, you'll see it disappear. It's gone, or not as the case may be, and it reappears. I can use small or large buttons. You can see the difference there. And I can choose peek. So let's see what that does. Let's open up something. If I open up File Explorer here and then minimize it, if I'm in peek, or if I've got peek enabled, if I hover over that, you can see it shows me a sneak preview of what's running. I can replace command prompt with PowerShell. So to have a look at that, if I right click Start here, you can see that PowerShell appears. If I deselect that option, if If I right click, you can see that command prompt is there instead. So you can configure the taskbar there. To configure notifications, I can go into settings, and then on system, I can choose notification and actions. And you can see here, get notifications from apps and other senders. I've got Focus Assist to help me here. If I'm doing a presentation or something, I don't want to receive notifications from applications like Messenger or something. I can turn that off through Focus Assist, so it recognizes that I'm in a presentation and it will only show me emergency notifications or those that I want to allow through. I can specify whether or not notifications will appear on the lock screen and so on. And at the moment I've got notifications only from these senders. I've only got this particular one configured, but I can, if I have multiple applications in, I can configure that behavior for each application. I can edit quick actions here. Quick actions are those tiles that appear down on the right hand side in the notification area or in the action center, and I can move these around or unpin them or replace them if I want to with others. I can also choose to collapse, and if I collapse I'll only see the top row, so I want to make sure that that top row is the most useful features to me. This is the Focus Assist option that I mentioned earlier on. I can configure the alarms only or priority only and then specify what the priority list is, and I can also specify the times when this will automatically be available. So I might not want to receive notifications between 11 PM and 7 AM. That seems pretty sensible to me. Also under system we have tablet mode, which I mentioned in the presentation. You can choose the option for when you sign in, use the appropriate mode for my hardware. And that seems a very sensible setting, so that whether or not you've got your keyboard detached doesn't require for you to do anything. It senses that straight away, so as soon as you sign in, it knows it needs to be in tablet mode or not in tablet mode. And also this option here, don't ask me and don't switch, or don't ask me and always switch. For me, I'd set that probably to don't ask me and always switch, because if I rotate my computer around the axis, I want it to turn off the keyboard and I want it to flick into tablet mode. When it's in tablet mode, I can control these additional behaviors as well. Okay, and the next thing we can have a look at is configuring the start menu itself. If we click on start, you can immediately start to reconfigure it. So if I want to rename some of these groups here, I just click in that area and I type in a new name. If I want to create a new grouping, I can simply drag an icon to an area of free space and then give it a new group. If I can type. To resize an app, if I right click it, I can choose resize here. Small, medium, wide or large. Let's see what large looks like there. Small. And then I can obviously group those together. If I want to uninstall an app, well, now that gets interesting. It depends on the type of the app. If it's a store app, I can right click it and then choose uninstall, depending. Now, if it's a built-in app, you can't uninstall it. But if it's an added-on app, then you can uninstall it from here. If you right-click a desktop app and choose the uninstall option, it takes you to Control Panel to remove the application. So it's relatively easy to customize the look and feel of this if you want to. Other options for things like this include turn live tile on or off. So if you've got a weather app or a news app, it will update itself with interesting content. So you can see over on the left hand side here, we've got a news app which has got a picture going on there. So that would update. We've also got a weather app showing us what the weather is like in Washington. And we can reconfigure that behavior. So we could say we want to turn off live tile, in which case it just shows a standard icon as opposed to the current weather. So in the demonstration, you saw some of the basics of how to configure the user interface and how to configure notifications and taskbar settings in the tablet mode. Microsoft Edge is the new browser in Windows 10. Windows 10 still ships with Internet Explorer, and you can choose either of those, or indeed a third-party browser if you prefer. The advantage of Microsoft Edge is that it's a store app and therefore uses fewer resources than, say, Internet Explorer. For the most part, you shouldn't experience any problems using Edge to navigate to some of your favourite websites. Edge includes a number of new features, including reading mode and the hub, which consolidates favourites, reading list, books, history, downloads and extensions. You can also make web notes by writing or drawing on a web page. Occasionally you might find websites that don't render correctly in Microsoft Edge, in which case you can use Internet Explorer. But when you're not sure whether to use Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge, you might have to switch between the two or configure Internet Explorer's compatibility view. Microsoft provide a tool called Enterprise Mode, which allows you to configure for particular websites a particular browser. To enable Enterprise Mode, download and install the Enterprise Mode Site List Manager tool for Windows 10. Search for that and then download and install it. Open the Enterprise Mode Site List Manager tool and add the URLs of the websites that need Internet Explorer. Choose Open in Internet Explorer 11 for each of these sites and then save the file to a network share. Next, open Group Policy Management on a domain controller or locally using the Local Group Policy Management tool. And then navigate to Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Microsoft Edge, or if you're on a domain controllers group policy, then Computer Configuration Policies, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Microsoft Edge. Open the Configure the Enterprise Mode Site List policy and then enter the location of the XML file that you just saved. In the demonstration, I'll show you how you can configure Microsoft Edge. I'll then show you how you can configure Enterprise Mode. Okay, I'm on my Windows 10 computer and I'll open up Microsoft Edge. To configure Microsoft Edge settings, click the ellipse button here and then choose Settings. You can then choose a theme. At the moment it's defaulting to light, but you can choose dark. And then specify what the open or landing page will be. It can be a specific page or pages I've configured here, or you can choose a new tab page or previous pages. When you open a new tab by clicking the plus symbol on the right hand side of an existing tab, you can specify that it will open with a blank page or with top sites or with top sites as suggested content. If you're new to Microsoft Edge, you can use the import or export option here to transfer your favorites from another browser. When I scroll down here, you can see settings including download location. And under the account heading here, you've got the option to configure a specific account. Typically that will be a Microsoft account or a Microsoft 365 account. Once you've specified the account, which you can configure through the Settings app, then you have the option to sync your settings. Synchronized settings enables you to have the same favorites, reading list, top sites, passwords and so forth across all of your devices that are also configured with Microsoft Edge. That's the reason I use Edge, in fact, because I've got a number of devices that are running other operating systems. I've got an iPad, I've got a Microsoft Surface Go, I've also got an iPhone and an Android phone, and they all are configured to use Microsoft Edge, and it's handy for me to be able to have the same favorites list and the same passwords for websites configured. For settings to sync properly through Edge, you have to first of all sync your Windows settings. So you click this link here and it will take you to the appropriate location to configure the Windows synchronization settings. On the Privacy and Security tab here, you can configure browsing data and clear any previous history that you want. You can configure cookie behavior, and then behavior such as show search and site suggestions as I type and show search history, and whether or not you wish to block pop-ups, and whether or not you want to enable Windows Defender Smart Screen, which helps protect against malicious sites. You can choose the option here on the Passwords and Autofill tab to specify that you want to save passwords, and then you can manage those passwords with this link here. And then you can autofill. That's a really nice feature of Edge, actually. If you go to a form, it will automatically fill in addressing information, for example, so it will remember as a complete suggestion your address and telephone number and name as soon as it encounters those fields, so it can save you quite a lot of time. Down here in the Advanced tab, you've got options for configuring Adobe Flash, Media Autoplay, permissions for certain websites, where necessary proxy settings, and Cortana settings. Over here you can see a summary of those settings. If I click here on Favorites, I can see a list of my favorites. None have been imported at the moment. My reading list, books, history, and downloads. none of which have been configured because this is a virtual machine for demonstration purposes. If I want, I can choose this option here for annotating a web page. And as you can see, I've got some controls here for making notes on the web page, which are stored locally. Okay, so that's configuring Microsoft Edge. Let's take a look at Enterprise Mode now. This is the Enterprise Mode Sitelist Manager tool. And now to configure for a particular browser to be used for a particular website, choose File, and then I can choose Import or Export if I've got an existing file, or click Add here, and then specify the URL www.microsoft.com, and then specify for this particular website that I want to use Internet Explorer in a particular mode or the default mode, and then specify that the default mode is IE11 or MS Edge accordingly. So IE11 in this case, and then say save. It's going to validate the URL for me. I'll add it anyway. It might be a function of the fact that I'm running this in a VM. So there's the first of the websites, and then I might add in another for contoso.com, and then specify that that must run in Microsoft Edge, for example. So the next thing I need to do is save that away, save as an XML file. It needs to be to a central location, a UNC shared folder. I'm saving this on my local workstation and then calling it sitelist.xml. I'm going to copy that into the paste buffer because I'm going to need that again in a second. So it's now saved that away. The next thing to do is to open group policy. Now I'm using the local group policy editor here, and I've already navigated to the appropriate location mentioned earlier on, but just to reiterate, that's computer configuration, admin templates, Windows components, Microsoft Edge, and then select the configure the enterprise mode site list value, double click that, select enabled, and then paste in the location of the XML file that you created earlier. Now I'm only configuring this locally, but obviously if you configure this on a domain controller using group policies in a domain, then all users will have access to the same settings, assuming that they're configured to use that particular group policy. And all I need to do now is click OK, and that setting's enabled. So in that demonstration you saw how to configure some of the settings in Microsoft Edge and how to configure enterprise mode. From the Tools menu, you can access Manage Add-ons. You can also manage Compatibility View settings. And then finally, you can configure Internet Options. Within Internet Options, you have a tab dialog box. General, Security, Privacy, Content, Connections, Programs, and Advanced settings are all accessible. In this demonstration, we'll take a look at how to configure Internet Explorer. So let's take a look at configuring Internet Explorer. Unlike Microsoft Edge, it's not pinned to the taskbar, so I'm going to need to locate it. It's actually in a folder at the bottom of the apps list, but I'll type at least part of its name, and then I'll right-click Internet Explorer and choose Pin to Taskbar. I've configured it to open in a blank page, but you can configure that as you'll see in a moment. So to configure the options, click on the cog here, Tools, and choose Internet Options. You can also configure add-ons and compatibility view settings. If a website that you visit doesn't work properly in Internet Explorer 11, choose compatibility view settings and you can configure it to run in an earlier version or run as if it's in an earlier version of Internet Explorer. It can sometimes get around a problem with a particular website expecting a particular version. Under Internet Options, you've got the tabbed dialog box here. The home page is configured to be about blank, but I can use the default, or I can use a new tab, or I can use whatever is the current page that I'm looking at. When I open up Internet Explorer, it can start with the home page, which is what I've configured it to do, or start with tabs from whatever was the last browsing session. I can change how websites are displayed in tabs, and I can manage my browsing history here. I can also change the basic appearance. On the Security tab, you have a number of predefined zones. Each one of these zones, Internet, Local Intranet, Trusted Sites and Restricted Sites, has a different level of security pre-configured. You simply need to add sites to the appropriate zones to have those security settings enforced. So for example, if you visit a site that you find is very untrustworthy, you can select Restricted Sites, click the Sites button, and then type in the URL and type add. If you're actually on the site at the moment, then it will pre-fill this field to the site that you're looking at the moment. If a site is trustworthy, click on the Trusted Sites option, click Sites, and again it predisposes itself to use the existing site, the site that you're looking at, but you can type in any URL here. Note that for trusted sites, the default is to require server verification, in other words, an HTTPS prefix. You can clear that if you want to, but you need to be careful about adding non-SSL sites to this list, because you can't genuinely verify that the site is who it claims to be. You can adjust the security settings for each of the zones, but you need to be careful doing that. You need to know what you're doing. So for example, on Internet, I can choose medium-high security, or I can drag it up to very high, and that will make a change. Or I can configure the custom level and go through each of these options. On the Privacy tab, you can configure cookie behavior on the Sites button here, based on each individual site that you visit. You can also configure privacy settings on an advanced basis by configuring first-party and third-party cookies here. Pop-up blocker is enabled by default, but you can configure the settings on a per-site basis, and you can configure default blocking levels based on pre-configured settings. On the Content tab, you can configure SSL and certificate settings. Certificates are a very important way of identifying servers and websites as being who they say they are. At the core of that is your computer's ability to understand where a certificate came from, and that's what you configure on the Publishers button here. So you can specify which certificates and from which publishers you're prepared to trust. Windows 10 supports a wide variety of certificate types from a number of different certificate publishers, but you may need to configure these slightly differently for your organizational needs. On the Connections tab, you probably won't need to configure anything. It's highly unlikely. But if there's a peculiarity about the way a particular computer connects to the internet, perhaps it goes through a proxy, or there are particular local area network settings that you need to account for, then you might need to visit this page. Given the likelihood of that, I'm not going to spend long looking at it. On the Programs tab, you can specify when you open Internet Explorer what happens. You can specify managing add-ons. Add-ons are functional components that do specific things within web pages. So for example, you've got an option here for link click to call. So if you see a link contact and you click it, it will open up Link, what we now call Skype for Business. There are various accelerators available and search providers, so you can turn those on or off as you need. And then you can specify an editor for HTML editing, and you can specify which particular programs you want to use for things like browsing or email or whatever. So in actual fact, that just takes us to a link in Control Panel for setting your default programs. And then file associations. So if a particular file is located on a web page, then what will Internet Explorer do? What program will it open based on that file extension? And the Advanced tab finally allows you to configure fine detail about the way your browsing experience works. It's not something you'll probably spend a lot of time looking at unless there's a specific need, a specific requirement for a particular user. In the demonstration, you saw how to configure Internet Explorer. The ability to work with files when you're not connected to the corporate network is important. So when you enable offline files, specified network files are cached locally for offline access when you're not connected to the corporate network. A Windows 10 computer accesses the local cache in the following situations: when the always offline mode has been enabled, when cost-aware synchronization is configured and enabled, when the server is unavailable due to a network outage or malfunction, when the network connection is slower than a threshold that you've configured, when the user manually switches to offline mode. To enable the always offline mode, you can use group policies to enable the configure slow link mode policy and set the latency to 1 millisecond. To enable the background file synchronization of offline files for a group of users while using metered connections such as a data plan on a mobile phone, use group policies to enable the enable file synchronization on costed networks policy. These appear under administrative templates, network, offline files. You can use the synchronization center to sync everything, or you can select particular elements that you want to synchronize and then specify a schedule that you'll use for synchronization. The two options: at a scheduled time or when an event occurs. Depending on your choice, you can opt for more scheduling options, such as sync only when the computer has been idle for a period of time, or sync if the computer is not running on a battery. Windows To Go is an ability to create a full installation of Windows 10 Enterprise on a USB flash drive. So you don't have to take your laptop to work, you merely need to take a USB flash drive and insert it into a compatible USB port, turn on the computer, it will boot from the flash drive and you're running your version of Windows 10. So effectively you've got Windows to plug and go. It's only available for users of Enterprise Edition. It doesn't support Windows Recovery Environment. We'll talk much more about the recovery environment later in the course, but it's the primary tool for performing recovery of computers that don't start or experience problems with devices or services. You can use group policy settings to configure Windows To Go behavior, as you can see here under the Portal Pool Operating Systems node. This is located under Computer Configuration, Administrative Template, Windows Components, Portable Operating System. To configure Windows To Go, you need to create a workspace. Mount the Windows 10 installation file or image. Insert a certified Windows To Go at least three USB drives. So that's going to be a fast USB device with sufficient storage space. And then launch the Create a Windows To Go Workspace wizard. Click through the wizard and specify the following. Select the USB drive, select the Windows 10 image, choose whether or not to password protect and encrypt the drive with BitLocker and a password, and choose whether to boot to the new Windows To Go workspace now. Finally, users of mobile devices might be interested in the Mobility Center, which consolidates all of the suitable settings, those settings that are of most use to users of laptop devices. So you've got the option, for example, to configure your display brightness, control volume, manage your power settings and power options, to configure landscape or vertical orientation, to determine whether you're connected to external displays or not, to configure synchronization behavior, and to enable presentation mode. Remember, when you turn on presentation mode, that can have an impact on things like notifications. These days, power is one of the most important characteristics of a device. The ability to last a whole day without having to gain access to a power outlet is pretty important. It's certainly one of the things I considered when I was looking at my laptop and my tablet devices. If I can manage a whole day without having to lug around a power charger, I'm very happy. So within Windows 10, there are some power options that are configurable through the Settings app. You can see these here on the screen. You've got power and sleep options, and you've also got battery options. Power and sleep allows you to configure what will happen to the screen on battery power. It will turn off, as you can see here, in 5 minutes, or when plugged in, it will turn off after 10 minutes. You can also configure the system behavior as well. On the battery node in the Settings app, you can also configure what happens when you get to a low level of power. In this case, it's configured to be 20%, and then you might get some particular behaviors that will result in that based on the fact that you've got low battery life, so it will start to dim the display or disable certain features. If those basic configuration options through settings are not sufficient, Windows 10 also within Control Panel gives you access to power plans. Which ones are available will depend on the manufacturer of your hardware, but generally speaking, you'll have a power saver, a balanced and a high performance power plan. The power saver option uses the least power. That seems logical given its name. The screen will turn off after 5 minutes of inactivity, and system activity is designed to reduce performance where possible to save power. The balance plan balances power consumption, so it's a medium consumption. You can configure the plan to power off after a period that you've decided is appropriate, and it determines computer activity and continues to use full power to all system components in use where that's possible. High performance uses the highest amount of power. It sets the screen to 100% brightness and keeps the computer's components supplied fully with power. Let's have a look at these options now. I'm going to show you how to configure power options, battery settings, and power plans. Okay, so if I open up settings and then choose system and then click power and sleep, I can specify what will happen with the screen when it's on battery power and what happens when it's plugged in. I might set that to never, for example. On the battery tab, I can configure to turn battery saver on automatically if power drops below 20% or some other value, and then lower the screen brightness while in battery saver mode. There are also some additional options here for change battery settings for playing video and some battery saving tips. Now I've got more requirements for controlling power. If I go back to power and sleep and then click on additional power settings, it takes me to control panel. The options that you have here depend largely on the type of device and the vendor of the device. As you can see here, it's using the balance plan by default. I can create my own power plan and then configure options accordingly. So create a power plan, and we can choose that it will use or be based on high performance. And then I can configure what will happen with the display when it's on battery and plugged in. So we set that to never and set that to 15 minutes, whatever. Then click create and then change the plan settings and choose change advanced power settings. And then you can configure hard disk shutdown based on battery or plugged in, wireless adapter settings. That can make a significant difference, but you want to be careful. I've discovered sometimes you experience problems when you disable the wireless adapter to save power and then you maybe restore from sleep. Sometimes that can be a problem. You can configure sleep behavior, USB settings. You can control what happens with power buttons and the lid. Now this is not a laptop, I'm running a virtual machine here. It knows it's on battery, but it doesn't have the notion of a lid to shut as such, so it's not presenting you with all of the options here. But depending on the type of device that you have, you'll have more or less options here. And then a variety of other settings to do with how the battery is handled when we're getting onto low and critical levels. What you don't want to have happen is to run out of battery in the middle of doing something. So you want a level of notification so that you know that you're approaching those lower levels. Perhaps a simple warning at about 10% and maybe a dimming of the display is enough. But when you've made any changes, you click Save Changes and you've then updated the power plan. If there are any set plans options that are not available, you can choose this option here, Change Settings that are currently unavailable. Under Power Options on the left hand side, you can also choose when to turn off the display, and again, if you're a laptop, you'll typically have options listed here for what happens when you press the power buttons or what happens when you close the lid. So for example, on my laptop, that would put the device to sleep. So in the demonstration, we saw how to configure power options, battery settings, and power plans.